Bookseller Crow on the box. Tales from an empty bookshop.
Hello and welcome to the first of a series that we're calling Tales from an Empty Bookshop. Normally at our events we would be looking out at probably about 60 or 70 people. We'd have a little bar over in the corner there. There'd be music going before we start, but none of that's happening today. Today I'm very pleased to welcome Gavanndra.
Hello.
Who we're going to stick pretty much to the same format that we normally do, whereby whoever our guest is reads a piece from their book, then we'll ask a few questions, maybe read another bit, I don't know, we'll see how we get on. And normally we take questions from the audience, but that's not going to happen until the film is online, and then there will be an audience then.
Yeah.
We'll organise some questions that way. So yeah, if you want to read
Fab. Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. So I'm going to read from chapter 3 of my book. The first chapter of my book, well, the prologue really is about my sister's death, and she died in a hotel room in Tunisia when she was 9 and I was 14, and her death sort of set in motion the sort of the destruction of my family, the sort of implosion of it. But the fact is that my family was already sort of built on fairly shaky grounds. So as the book kind of goes forward, it sort of examines my past as well as it's written from now. Well, actually not now, it's written from 2014, which is when I wrote it, as a person sort of looking back and trying to piece together their childhood. So that's just to give you some context. So I shall begin. 2014, London. When I was a baby, my father used to blow the smoke from his joint into my face to stop me crying, and put a tot of whiskey in my bottle to help me sleep. That was a long time ago. I'm not that person anymore. In our ground floor flat in South London, there are 2 fire alarms, one in the kitchen and one in the hall, both wired to mains electricity so they don't need to be checked. My children are fed, showered, stories read, and in bed by 8 p.m. At night, our house is dark and calm. In the morning, the sitting room and kitchen are clean, ready for another bright and sunny day. In the office where I work, the walls are painted white and the desks are clean and white too. I am neat and together, in control, on top of everything. I am the deputy editor of Tatler, the oldest magazine in the world, a grand and solid institution, if perhaps a little frivolous, a grand and solid job, and a nice way to pay the mortgage. I've had it for a year. I wish Dad were alive to see it. He would have been so proud. He would have lied and told everyone I was the editor. I like to get home by 7:15 so I can put the children to bed. But sometimes when an article goes awry or deadlines loom, I have to stay late. This is one of those nights. I am researching a story about the 80s Sloanes, a tribe lavishly depicted in the pages of Tatler. My research involves looking through old copies of the magazine. I have a great pile of them on my desk, bound in red leather with gold writing on the spines, so that they look like dictionaries or encyclopedias, tomes containing important knowledge. I am alone. The movement-sensitive lights in the ceiling wink off one by one until only the bulb above my head still shines. I turn the pages, observing the strapless gowns, the ziggurats of champagne glasses, the heirloom tiaras, the uproarious and non-stop fun. Tatler is a magazine about aristocrats, royals, the rich, their houses, their pets. I am the daughter of a hairdresser from Bromley and a model from Woodford Green. My grandfather was an off-stone sub at the News of the World. My uncle was a butcher who once got into trouble for selling stolen meat. One aunt was a florist, another was a waitress. These are not my people. But then I begin to see them. The ones who sat in my living room at night. The ones who bought heroin from my father and took it while I watched. They're all here, John, Quentin, Michael, Sarah, youthful and golden, not emaciated and nicotine-stained, not how I remember them. There are others I remember too, Jamie, Marquess of Blandford, and Lady Alethea Savile. I find a portrait of her dressed in a silk ball gown, blonde hair blow-dried, lips shiny with pale gloss, seated in a beautiful blue and green tiled room. Dad cried when he discovered that she had died of a suspected drug overdose in her flat in Chelsea. Her twin brother, also a friend of Dad's, found her body after she died. I was making my own breakfast by the time I was 3, climbing onto the kitchen worktop to pull down packets of cereal, going into the living room to eat fistfuls of Rice Krispies out of the box in front of the television, the screen too close to my nose, the room dark, wine bottles and ashtrays all around, my parents still asleep, who knew when they would wake up. My mother once told me that she and Dad were surprised to find themselves pregnant a second time because they had been so wasted on booze and drugs that they couldn't remember having had sex. I would have been nearly 4 years old when they conceived my sister. If they couldn't remember having sex, who was looking after me? I don't ask this question. I don't want to upset her. They'd met late one night on the embankment. Mum had been to a ball. She was a model, so she was probably paid to go, paid to look gorgeous. Sometimes she was paid to pretend to be the girlfriend of a person she barely knew, a European actor or film director who needed a woman on his arm for an event. But on this night, she'd had enough of pretending. She was standing on the street waiting for a cab that never arrived, her toes numb in her high heels, her lacquered curls wilting. And along came Dad, driving his psychedelic camper van, the Rolling Stones blaring from the stereo, his long hair dyed orange by henna and the Spanish sun. He was just back from 3 years in Marbella, and the first person he saw in London was Mum, a gorgeous blonde in distress. He pulled over, the cars around him beeping in protest, and wound down the window. "Hop in, love. I'll take you where you want to go." I was conceived not long afterwards. It was a hot King's Road afternoon, perfect for lovemaking by an open window, a round of applause at the end from the art school students who had gathered to watch in the halls of residence opposite. The doctors told my parents they were having a boy. They were going to call me Gavin Jr. But when I was born a girl, my dad made up Gavanndra, insisting on the 2 N's, even though the man at the register office told him he was spelling the name wrong. My mum chose my middle name, Layla, after her favourite song by Derek and the Dominoes. My parents married 2 months after I was born. It was Mum's birthday. Dad had forgotten to buy her a present, so asked her to marry him instead. This is how my family began, chance and brazen caprice, instability that has to become solid at some point, doesn't it? Because otherwise there is nothing to build on, nothing that a child can be certain of. I was that child. My memories of my father's dealer days are not narrative, they are sensory. The toothache sweetness of the Alpen and butterscotch Angel Delight mixture that was the only food that he, a junkie, could eat. The dusty smell of the incense, the rough scratch of the Killam cushion material. I must have been a little high myself, dopey with heroin smoke, my hazy memories not so different to the fragmentary recollections of the other people there, the ones who lost a whole decade, often a whole life to drugs. But I know it happened. I know I sat in the living room with those people night after night, watching them chase the dragon, snort coke, smoke joints, cleaning up after them, managing their chaos in my small, determined way. The story starts to knit together as I get a bit older, when I better understood what my father and his friends did every night. It was not what other people's parents did, I discovered once I started staying the night with friends and would creep around dark houses in which everyone was asleep by 11 p.m. I would get scared, wake up the parents, tell them I wanted to go home. It was dangerous too, I discovered, the day a rival dealer tried to break into our flat, banging his fists against the door, kicking at it until the wood splintered. Dad pushed himself against the door, shouting, "Fuck off." Eventually the man gave up and left. Emotional intensity helps to set memory, and fear is the most intense emotion of all because we have the most to learn from it. I remember one night when I had grown larger, was less nimble, less able to fold myself quietly into a corner. They were all there, in our living room, more of them than usual, faces I didn't recognise. The coffee table was piled with various powders, the ashtrays full, the novelty mugs brimming with cheap red wine. I got up to move from one part of the room to another. I don't know whom or what I was going towards or getting away from, but I was ungainly in my fast-changing body, and the space around the coffee table was a narrow obstacle course of cushions, glasses, and outstretched limbs. I tripped, stumbled, reached out. My hand found the table, and I leant on it to stop myself falling over. But like so much else in our flat, the table was broken, the base not properly attached to the tabletop, even though Dad had patched it with gaffer tape. The thick glass tipped beneath my weight, and all the heroin and cocaine, the wine, the ashtrays, everything on it began to tumble and merge, slipping off the table at once, fast and slow. They were shouting at me, "What the fuck are you doing?" As the thing they loved the most was lost in our stained old carpet, mixed with wine and warm ash and razor blades. They got onto their hands and knees and tried to salvage their beautiful heroin, but it was ruined, and it was my fault, and they all hated me, even Dad. That was a long time ago. I am not that person anymore.
Phew.
Sorry.
Not at all. So, are you the only Gavanndra in the world?
Yes, I am the only Gavanndra. Sorry. I am the only Gavanndra in the world, although I do sometimes, in sort of bored moments, Google my name, and I once discovered a Gavanndra, but spelled with one N, in Jamaica. And when, in 1980, when I was 5, we went on a trip to Jamaica because my dad had sold his life story to the News of the World, and we spent it on a trip to Jamaica, and lovely Jamaican ladies used to look after me every single night while my mum and dad were out getting pissed and getting high and having fun. So, and I loved them, and we made banana bread together, and they did my hair, and I think one of them decided to call their daughter Gavanndra. So there is another one, but it's not spelled right.
but it could become quite freaky if you suddenly...
Well, I always hoped that I wouldn't be the last, indeed, that there would be more. But yeah, it's one of those names that you have to explain and spell a lot.
That's the third chapter of the book. The
Yes.
first chapter of the book deals with your sister's
Death.
very unexpected death.
Mm.
Do you want to speak a little bit more about that?
Sure. So Candy was 9 and I was 14, and we were on holiday in Tunisia. Not only that, my parents got clean when I was about 9. So this was during the point in our lives that our family was relatively normal. So Dad stopped taking drugs, Mum stopped drinking, Dad stopped dealing drugs, Dad was a hairdresser, Mum worked in a model agency. So we were a normal family on a lovely family holiday in Tunisia. And my sister was completely well and fine, and doing what she would normally do during the day, swimming, having pancakes, and then at sort of 11 o'clock I can hear coughing, and my mum knocked on the door and said, "Come, Candy's not well." When I went into the hotel room, which was adjacent to mine, and Candy was sort of running around, there's sort of blood at her mouth. Mum left the room to go and see if she could find help or find a taxi, and my dad and Dad sort of pulled Candy to him, and she died in his arms. I watched that happen when I was 14, which was an extraordinary thing to happen, but I felt incredibly numb and incredibly dislocated as I watched it. And it's hard to talk about, but it's the only part of her, and sort of the impetus for writing the book was realising that I couldn't remember her at all. She was 9, I was 14, I shared a bedroom with her for years, but I could remember nothing about her apart from that moment when I watched her die. And it was sort of, that was the thing that made me want to write about her, to try and sort of find her again, because I felt very sad and kind of bereft that I'd had a sister and she died, and then I'd lost her again because I'd allowed myself to forget about her. So part of the process of the book is a trying to allow myself to grieve in a way that I didn't allow myself to grieve when I was 14, because I was too freaked out, I was too young, it was too much. And through, by grieving, you can start remembering, I think.
And what exactly did she die of?
She died of a rare airborne virus that my mum can no longer remember the name of. So, which at the time, the coroner's report and the doctor said to us, it's incredibly rare, only one child in Europe dies of it a year. But basically it was an airborne virus that she could have caught in London, that was just shut down her internal organs pretty much. So her lungs, her heart, everything just stopped working just that night, like suddenly. We couldn't see anything wrong with her during the day. And so it's very shocking. It turns your concept of reality upside down. People don't just drop down dead. So that was hard.
And throughout the book, you talk about the various stages of coming to terms with it and the length of time that it took. And there's an extraordinary passage where you go for acupuncture.
Yes. So I tried lots of different things. You know, I went to see a therapist and did EMDR, which is this process where you kind of process traumatic emotions. I went to have these things where, like cranial sacral therapy. I went to have this thing where they kind of squeeze all your muscles to find where the trauma is. I did all this stuff. I spoke to people, and I went to have acupuncture with nothing to do with Candy, although I had been for acupuncture for grief to a different person, but this acupuncture lady, Laura, did acupuncture in my face, which, because I'm sort of quite vain and I don't want to look old, so I wanted her to, facial acupuncture helps you not get wrinkly, and so I was there, and she's quite sort of woo-woo anyway, and she's like, there's someone in the room with us, and I was like, who? You know, because I've always been quite suspicious of being in therapist rooms, that someone could sneak in at any moment. And then she's like, she's very young, she's very agitated. I find it quite hard to be in the room with her. She smells very sweet, she loves sweet things, she doesn't know what happened to her. Do you know who this could be? And I was like, I guess. And so I told Laura, the acupuncturist, about my sister, and at the time I'd not written about my sister.
She didn't know about her.
She didn't know about her at all. She knew nothing about me apart from the fact that I was quite vain, literally, and worked at Tatler. And so I explained to her what had happened. She was like, well, yes, she's here, and she doesn't know what happened to her. You really need to tell her what happened to her. And I can't be in the room, I've got to leave. So I was like, okay, fine. And I don't know how the universe works, I don't believe in ghosts, but I just thought, who knows what's going on here, but I will do what she says. And so just in my head, I spoke to Candy and I explained to her exactly what had happened. And it felt kind of wonderful. It felt like a release. It felt like it definitely sort of, just doing that made her more kind of alive to me in a way, just going through that process. So it was bonkers, and it still makes you feel a bit like, ooh, what happened there? But it was not an unpleasant experience, albeit a strange one.
You work as a journalist. If you were going to interview you,
yes,
what would be your first question?
Oh God, I've not been asked that question. I've been asked so many questions, but I haven't been asked that one. I guess, why did it take you so long? And also, you know, I was trying to write books for a long time. I always wanted to be a writer. Journalism was just so I could write, so I could be a writer, kind of thing. And I tried writing loads of other books, and they just never worked. And they always sort of ended up being kind of about the same thing, but not very well done about the same thing. And I was sort of scared. And I would tell people bits of my story because I didn't want my life to be defined by the things that had happened to me. I wanted to move on and move away, but not necessarily in a positive way, just kind of run away from the past and be a new person in the present. So I didn't want it to all be about my past. But when I did tell people, they're like, well, you should write about that. And I was like, well, I don't know if I want to write that. And because I think I worry about memoir and truth and memory, because I want, memoir is truth and it has to be the things that happened, but memory is very slippery. And you know, even in the writing of this book, I discovered that my memories had changed things. So I wrote about seeing my sister die, and then first, and then in the process of trying to grieve for her, I dug out a diary entry that I'd written 3 days after she died, or thereabouts, in Tunisia. And I reread it, and the two accounts had really kind of glaring differences. So I was like, crikey, if even I cannot remember properly the most significant thing that happened in my life. But then I thought, it's memoir, it's memory, it's not truth. So I think that was something that I struggled with. But then I just realised that actually it's fine. This is the book of things that happened to me as I remember them.
But surely you would have, if in trying to write something else, and keeping this sort of sublimated. Yeah,
it kept sort of popping out in weird ways.
I mean, because it is a kind of, it is the extraordinary story of.
Yes, exactly. But I think it's partly, like, I really remember, I quite naff. Like I used to like playing live role play Dungeons and Dragons when I was quite little, when I was like 11, and I remember I made up a really stupid name for myself, and they were like, "What's your real name?" I said Gavanndra. They're like, "That's a much cooler name. Why are you calling yourself Grey Zaka when you could be Gavanndra?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, maybe you're right. Okay." So I think it's partly that. It's also I am quite introverted, and I'm quite sort of, you know. Anyway, so that's what I want to know. Why did it take me so long to write this flipping book?
How long did it take?
Well, I mean, Candy died when I was 14 and I'm now 45, so in essence 30 years, but I started writing it actually 5 years ago, and I started writing it while I was still working at Tatler, and I in fact chose a really mad moment to start writing it when the editor was on maternity leave and I was editing the magazine. So it's like the busiest, most intense, most overwhelming kind of professional moment in my life. My children were very young, and I was making myself get up at 5 o'clock every morning to write this stuff which was so personal, kind of wrenched up out of the sort of the darkness of my soul, and then I would go in to do this very stressful job, and I think I sort of made myself go a bit mad in the process. So then after about 6 months of that, and sort of making myself feel quite ragged, I then started to do the more sensible things like have therapy and, you know, do it in a more kind of measured way.
It seems quite a journey from the childhood that you described early on to where you ended up not that many years later.
Yeah.
I mean, how did you manage to travel out of that
It
sort
was
of South Kensington,
yeah,
Kings Roady sort of
decadent. Yeah, I think when I was young, so this period that I talk about when Dad stopped using and Mum stopped drinking, and we were this relative normality. Dad had a chain of hairdressing shops, Mum worked at a model agency, so we were sort of normal middle class people. They sent me to a good private school, and I really thrived there, and I really loved learning. I was like, wow, actually, and I hadn't understood this or realised this, I'm quite good at academic stuff, and this was sort of almost a revelation to me because I just hadn't really known. And after Candy died, I sort of lost that, and I became after Candy died, Dad started taking drugs again. Mum became a born again Christian. My mum was very openly grieving, and I found that very hard to engage with, so I sort of went off with my dad and started drinking and taking drugs with him. And I think that partly is part of the forgetting Candy, but also it meant that I sort of gave up all the things that had made me happy, which were, you know, reading, you know, translating Latin, you know, the things that had made me feel safe and in control. Sort of gave those up to sort of sitting bars in Knightsbridge with my dad, getting pissed on champagne, taking cocaine in the liver, watching him flirt with my friends. Sort of that was the route that I chose. And then when I was 16, we were on a holiday, another holiday, bad things always happen to me on holiday, in Portugal. And my dad, unbeknownst to me, or kind of, I had worked it out, but I hadn't admitted to myself as having an affair with a girl who was at my school. We'd met through me, and on that holiday my mum found out, and my parents, you know, were going to separate, and my dad was going to end up going with this girl. And sort of the day after that happened, I discovered that I'd completely cocked up my GCSEs as well. So I was like, okay, this is terrible, like my world is falling apart, it's literally gone. And I decided the only thing I could do was just try and work hard at school. That was the only thing left open to me. So I did, and then I did well in my A-levels, went to Cambridge, and I sort of fought incredibly hard, sort of like scrabbled my way to some kind of normal life that I had to sort of build for myself, and an identity. And I went to Cambridge, and I was like, okay, this is safe, I like this, I'm going to be a different person here. But then it almost like I had to become someone different to progress, and I had to leave behind that version of me. So it was sort of hard won, that. And so sometimes I used to get a bit annoyed. Like I remember when we did the Tatler documentary, like there's assumptions that people make about me because of the way I sound and what they, you know, that, oh gosh, you know, you're very privileged and lucky, aren't you? And I was like, in some ways, yes, obviously, but in some ways, really not. And you have no idea who I am, or, you know, what I've been through, or what I had to do in order to have a flat, a husband, you know, just to have a normal life. I feel like I've done an epic marathon just to get to the point that most people I know is just like the normal thing, like you would expect to have, you know, a job, a house and stuff, and I'm like, oh my god, I've done this, that's sort of by myself. But yeah, so it wasn't easy.
And are you still writing? Are you going to?
Yes, I am, and I always planned, and I have about 3 other books in my head, but I kind of haven't managed to start writing them yet because I have my children at home, and it's lockdown, and we're all very kind of confused and dislocated. So I'm finding it hard to kind of focus and concentrate, especially as there are 3 other people in my house who are quite noisy and irritating. No, I didn't say that. They're lovely.
How have the children coped with?
You've been alright, it's been a bit nuts. But I think everyone's the same, we're just kind of taking it a day at a time and just trying to keep everyone happy and make nice food, and we're lucky. We're lucky we haven't lost anyone, but it's been tough for everyone in different ways. The whole process.
Do you want to read a bit more?
Yeah. I don't know what to read next. Maybe I shall read about my dad and his aortic aneurysm. Just need to find it. I think it's quite near the end. Yeah, do that. Excuse me while I find it. Or I could talk about the bit in Cambridge where I start being a drug dealer and then decide, no, actually, I'm not going to be. But here we are. All right, okay. So this is chapter 30, 2005, London. I could never believe my father would die. He was a bull of a man, built for endurance, a happy god with a big belly and a wolf smile, gulping wine as though it was water, sucking so hard on his cigarette that he made the filter soggy, snorting 2 lines of cocaine just to hoover his flat on a Saturday morning. Once he was very proud of himself because a doctor had examined him and told him that all the cocaine had cleared his lungs of tar, that the amphetamines had made his heart strong. Dad was so pleased with the awe this young doctor felt for his miraculous 60-year-old body. The best bit was when the doctor said that the only other case he had seen like it was Keith Richards. Me and Keith, it's just me and Keith, 2 old rockers, Dad said. It was as if the drugs, the alcohol, the smoking had made him healthier, which sounds impossible, but if you'd met him, you'd have believed it. My mother would sometimes say, it's going to be so hard on you when he goes, and I would say, yeah, without commitment or concern. Her heavy words were light to me because she didn't understand what I understood, that it was never going to happen. She didn't know what I knew. I am not sure whether this myth of immortality was his or mine. Either way, I took it more seriously than he did. For him, everything was a joke, even death. Dad hadn't even told me about his latest visit to the hospital. The first I knew was when he phoned me at work on a Thursday afternoon. We were due to have dinner that night at Pucci's, a pizza restaurant on the King's Road, where we always went because we'd known the owners for years, and because Dad liked going back to the same places again and again, the same way he liked watching the same films and telling the same stories again and again. All right, my darling, it's your old Dad, he said, sounding as if he was lazing on a sun lounger somewhere exotic, even though it was late November and already dark outside, black branches thrashing in the wind. Hi, I said, 7:30, right? Bella is coming too. I was being short with him, but I had a lot to do, and this conversation was superfluous. All the arrangements had been made. I would relax when I saw him, when the wine was in front of me. I was looking forward to it. Great, oh yeah, you've got a minute, right? Because I've just been to the hospital, the new one, Royal Brompton. It's like a hotel in there. Anyway, it was just meant to be a checkup, scans and stuff, but the guy said that I have an aneurysm. He paused, and he said it more carefully, as though he was reading from a prompt. An aortic aneurysm. I think it's quite serious. I already had the phone lodged between my ear and my shoulder, hunched to keep it secure while I typed the words into my computer, the sounds of the newsroom fading, so the only thing I could hear was my father breathing, the laboured rasping amplified and made more dangerous by the hollow plastic handset, a coiled wire, the distance between us, all the way to a satellite floating beyond the Earth's atmosphere and back. I read quickly. A dilation of the aorta, which could result in sudden rupture and massive internal bleeding. Fucking hell, Dad. Sorry about this, by the way. This is serious. What did the doctor say? What are they going to do? Where are you now? Are you in the hospital? No, mate, they sent me away with my aneurysm. He laughed and then coughed. He was trying to make it sound fun, as though he had a new pet. My aneurysm. but I could tell by the thin pull in his voice that he was scared. I heard him light a cigarette, the sudden intake of breath, the slow outward whoosh. I had read enough in those few seconds to know that smoking was one of the things that could cause a rupture. Smoking, drinking, unhealthy living, a massive rupture that would cause instant death. Fucking hell, Dad, I said again. The sub-editor, who had been standing by my desk unnoticed, placed 2 proofs on my keyboard. I've really got to go. I'll see you later, I said. Okay, I love you. Yeah. I felt too scared to talk, fizzy and numb at the same time. I put down the phone. I could still feel the pressure of the handset against my ear. It must have left a red mark because I had been pushing it against my head so hard. I looked at the proofs of the magazine, pretended to read, my eyes sliding across the letters without registering anything. I ticked my initials and handed the pages to the editor sitting next to me. I spent the next 2 hours researching aortic aneurysms, approaching it professionally, as if this was an act of work rather than heartache, delving deeper, taking notes, discounting websites that looked too homespun. I left the office with my eyes gristly from staring at my computer. I had not learnt much more than I had in those first few seconds. My father's aortic artery had ballooned in one fatal spot. The walls of this part of the vessel grew thinner with every heartbeat. The faster and more intense the heartbeat, the thicker and more syrupy the blood, the more likely the balloon would burst. There would be no advance warning of this calamitous internal explosion. It could just happen, any time or not. There was no way of knowing. All I knew was that he would have to change the way he'd always lived, the lying on the sofa drinking half a bottle of vodka while he watched films, the eating of all 4 creme caramels in a pack in one sitting, the duty-free multi-packs of Silk Cut that would be finished in a week, the beer before lunch and the Baileys before bed. Otherwise, my father, my happy immortal, would die, and that was unthinkable, impossible.
Thank you. There would normally be lots of applause now. Brilliant. You want to sign some books?
Yes,
now? That
yes,
would
I
be brilliant.
will. I've got my special pen.